Judge Judy tries to silence Jasmine Crockett, but Jasmine's reply shocks the courtroom. The courtroom was tense, the kind of silence where even the sound of a pen dropping could echo like thunder. Judge Judy, known for her sharp tongue and iron grip on control, had just raised her gavel midair. "Ms. Crockett," she snapped, "you will not continue down this line." "I said enough." Jasmine Crockett, standing tall at the witness stand, felt the weight of every eye in the room. Cameras rolled, journalists scribbled, and ordinary citizens sat on the edge of their seats. Judge Judy's words were final, at least, they usually were. But Jasmine didn't sit down. She didn't shrink back. Instead, she took a slow breath and let her eyes sweep across the room, landing not on the judge, but on the quiet figure sitting at the back, a young single mother clutching her child, trembling at the thought of losing everything. Jasmine wasn't speaking for herself, she was speaking for her. "Your Honor," Jasmine began softly, her voice steady but gentle, "with all due respect, I cannot be silent when silence means injustice. If my words can protect even one person from being trampled by the system, then I must speak." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed, ready to strike down the defiance, but Jasmine pressed forward, not with anger, but with compassion. "You've built your legacy on discipline and authority," Jasmine continued, "and I respect that. But authority without listening can become a wall that blocks out truth. And truth," she paused, "belongs not to the powerful, but to the people." The young mother in the back gasped softly, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, struck not by arrogance, but by the sheer humanity in Jasmine's words. Then, in a move that no one expected, Jasmine turned away from the bench and addressed the courtroom itself. "This isn't just about rules. It's about people's lives. About the father fighting for visitation rights, the mother who can't afford a lawyer, the child caught in the middle of battles they never chose. If we silence voices simply because they're inconvenient, we silence the very heartbeat of justice." The courtroom, once rigid and cold, now felt alive with energy. Even the reporters lowered their pens, watching in awe. Judge Judy's gavel hovered again, but this time, it didn't fall. Her lips parted as if to scold Jasmine, yet no words came. Instead, she slowly lowered the gavel and whispered, almost to herself, "Go on." It was as though time itself had shifted. For the first time in years, Judge Judy wasn't commanding the courtroom, she was listening. Jasmine smiled faintly and finished with a line that left the room breathless. "Justice is not about who holds the loudest gavel. It's about who has the courage to listen to the quietest voice." The young mother broke into tears, whispering, "Thank you." The audience erupted in applause, not for spectacle, but for truth. Even Judge Judy herself, usually stone-faced, gave the slightest nod of respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes the most powerful authority is humility. And when Jasmine stepped down, she didn't bask in victory. Instead, she walked straight to the back of the courtroom, knelt beside the mother, and held her hand. In that moment, it wasn't a politician standing tall, nor a judge presiding over a case. It was one woman reminding another that she wasn't alone. The cameras caught everything, and later, when the clip spread across the US, the UK, and Canada, people weren't sharing it for the drama. They were sharing it for the message. Compassion is stronger than control. Justice begins when we refuse to let silence win. One positive ending. Message. The story of that courtroom day lived on. Not because of the clash between Judge Judy and Jasmine Crockett, but because the world was reminded that kindness and courage can disarm even the harshest voice. The applause slowly died down, but the energy in the courtroom remained thick, almost electric. Judge Judy, still gripping her gavel, looked uncharacteristically unsettled. For decades, she had built her reputation on control, on cutting people down with razor-sharp words before they could even finish a sentence. But Jasmine Crockett had done something different, something Judge Judy hadn't expected. She hadn't fought back with anger. She hadn't raised her voice. She had chosen compassion instead. The cameras zoomed in on Judge Judy's face. For the first time, people saw not just the firmness of a judge, but the flicker of a woman reminded of her own humanity. She leaned forward, almost whispering, "Ms. Crockett, you've made your point." But Jasmine wasn't finished. She took a step closer to the bench, her voice steady but carrying warmth. "Your Honor, I believe the law is not here to protect the powerful, it's here to protect the vulnerable. The system works best when it remembers the human beings it serves." Her words struck a chord. In the gallery, a father who had been fighting for visitation rights with his children sat taller, hope in his eyes. An elderly woman who had been intimidated by the process nodded, her hands trembling but her spirit steadied. And then came the unexpected twist. A man in a worn-out suit, who had been sitting silently in the back, suddenly stood. His voice cracked with emotion. "Judge Judy, Ms. Crockett is right. I've been fighting in this very courtroom for 3 years. I lost my job, my home, nearly everything, but today, for the first time, I feel like someone actually sees me." The courtroom gasped. Cameras swiveled toward him. Judge Judy, caught off guard, did something she had never done in her long career. She allowed him to speak. She didn't cut him off. She listened. Tears filled his eyes as he continued. "I thought the system was designed to bury people like me. But when she spoke," he gestured toward Jasmine, "I realized maybe there's still justice left in this world." Jasmine walked over to him without hesitation. She placed her hand on his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him he wasn't alone. And in that simple act, touch, compassion, humanity, the entire atmosphere of the courtroom transformed. It was no longer about Judge Judy versus Jasmine Crockett. It was about people being seen. Judge Judy, visibly moved, finally spoke. Her voice trembled ever so slightly. "You've reminded me, Ms. Crockett, and perhaps reminded us all, that justice isn't about silencing, it's about hearing. I may not always agree with your methods, but I cannot deny the truth of your words." The gallery erupted again. Not in mockery, not in the usual spectacle of court TV, but in genuine applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, even wiping tears. For once, it wasn't the judge who held the room, it was compassion itself. When Jasmine left the courtroom that day, she didn't stop for interviews or bask in headlines. Instead, she walked hand in hand with the young mother and the man in the worn-out suit. No spotlight, no performance, just quiet kindness. And later, when the clip went viral across the US, the UK, and Canada, people weren't talking about the clash. They weren't saying, "Jasmine put Judge Judy in her place." They were saying something far deeper. They were saying, "This is what justice should look like. This is what leadership should sound like. This is what humanity feels like." The story became a reminder, echoed in schools, shared in homes, and replayed on news channels. True justice isn't found in the loudest gavel or the sharpest voice. It's found in the courage to care, even when it costs you. And so, the clash that could have ended in silence instead ended in hope. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument. She won back the belief that justice still has a heart. One final uplifting message: kindness is not weakness. Compassion is not compromise. And sometimes, the most powerful revolution doesn't begin with anger, it begins with listening. The clip of that courtroom moment didn't just circulate online, it exploded. Within hours, social media feeds across America, the UK, and Canada were flooded with the same words over and over again. "Right finger, did you see what Jasmine Crockett said to Judge Judy?" Some expected it to be a heated clash, a shouting match, a battle of egos. But what they saw instead was something far more powerful. They saw a woman refuse to be silenced. They saw a courtroom, once cold and rigid, transform into a space filled with compassion. They saw Judge Judy, the very face of authority, pause and listen. And that pause, just a few seconds of silence, spoke louder than 1,000 gavels ever could. A week later, that same young mother Jasmine had comforted received an update on her case. Instead of being dismissed as just another file, her story was taken seriously. Why? Because people were watching. Because humanity had entered the room. The man in the worn-out suit. He received pro bono legal help after a lawyer saw the clip online and said, "If Jasmine Crockett can stand up for him, so can I." And the courtroom that day, it became more than a legal proceeding, it became a spark. Students in law schools across Boston, Toronto, and London replayed the clip during lectures, asking their professors, "Why don't more lawyers argue with compassion?" Community leaders quoted Jasmine's line, "Justice isn't about the loudest gavel, it's about listening to the quietest voice. Even late-night hosts, who normally make jokes about courtroom dramas, fell silent before saying, "This wasn't entertainment. This was a reminder of what we've lost, and what we need to fight for." And what about Judge Judy? For days, she said nothing publicly. People wondered, was she embarrassed, angry, or perhaps, inspired? Then, on her next televised appearance, she surprised everyone. She looked directly into the camera and said, "Sometimes even a judge needs reminding. Justice is only as strong as its humanity." The audience went silent, and in that moment, viewers saw not the iron-fisted Judge Judy, but Judith Scheindlin, the woman behind the robe, acknowledging that she, too, could learn. Jasmine Crockett didn't set out to humiliate anyone. She didn't set out to win. She set out to speak truth, to defend the voiceless, to remind the world that laws without compassion are empty. And in doing so, she did something remarkable. She softened one of the hardest voices in American television. She gave courage to countless ordinary people. And she reminded us all that silence in the face of injustice is never an option. So what do we take from this moment? That kindness is not weakness. That listening is not surrender. And that sometimes, the greatest power we hold is not in speaking louder, but in caring deeper. Because true justice doesn't end with a verdict. It begins with compassion. And that is why Jasmine Crockett's reply will be remembered long after the courtroom walls have crumbled. That closes the full arc with narration pacing, which should comfortably fit 10 to 12 minutes when read with pauses, emphasis, and natural delivery.